And here we are back with Chapter 2, March 17th, 2023. The suite the jurors were sent into was comfortable but not lush. They opted to spend the rest of this first afternoon getting comfortable while they waited for dinner. They would begin deliberations after they had all eaten. They'd already introduced themselves on the first day. 6 of the 7 women were married or involved. The lone one available weighed 300 pounds at least and wasn't at all interested in getting funky with anything except food and more food. She was always eating. And the few times she opened her mouth, it was full and her words were hard to understand. For the most part, she was ignored by the 5 men or treated with limited compassion by a couple of the other women. Her name was Amy. The other women's names were Virginia, Joanna, Susan, Brenda. The 5 men's names were Morris, Darren, Jeff, Wayne, and Joe. They discussed religion first. 2 of them were atheists. One of them was an agnostic, except for one Jew. The others were all members of Christian sects. When politics came up for the discussion, the greatest majority were cynical non-voters. They mostly believed it didn't matter who got into office and the whole system was corrupt. And if the statesmen weren't corrupt in the beginning, they ended up that way in order to survive. Finally, they came around to discussing MJ's guilt or innocence. The room grew quiet. Brenda, the jury foreman, asked, "Are we ready to take a vote?" A small muttering ensued. She said, "Okay. Seems as though we need to have a discussion. Let's start with you on my right and go around in turn." Susan began, "Well, I think we really need to question the motive of this organization in Israel. Why would a group pour all this money into running this place? I mean, it must cost a small fortune to run the Institute, TV station, live lessons, publishing, translation, travel. How can they do all that without charging? It's pretty creepy if you ask me." Wayne spoke up and answered, "Apparently many of those who study pay a tithe or something. And anyway, that Rab guy is independently wealthy. He owns a bunch of medical clinics." Susan said, "Oh." The woman next to her, Regina, passed, as did Joanna. Morris put in, "I have my mind made up, but I got a joke I want to share, if that's okay. It's all in fun, so please try not to take any offense. It just seems appropriate since the defendant is gay and on pro-marijuana crusade." The foreman looked around the table. Everyone seemed amenable to this. "Go ahead," she said. He said, "It all makes sense now. Gay marriage and marijuana being legalized at the same time. Leviticus 20:13 says, if a man lay down with another man, he should be stoned. We've been misinterpreting it," he chuckled. First the room was deathly quiet, and then several snickered. It spread like wildfire around the table. Amy started choking the nuts she was eating. They all silenced and held their breath, hoping it wouldn't be any of them who had to do the maneuver to dislodge the food from her pipes. Jeff soberly added, "I've got my mind made up too." Then Joe and Darren each nodded in unison after he spoke. Amy, who was on Brenda's immediate left, had to finish chewing the mouthful of macadamia nuts and swallow before she contributed, "Yes, I've made up my mind too." Brenda asked them if they wanted to just do a vote by show of hands or if they wanted to run a secret ballot. The largest number of them wanted a private vote. Joe began to fold some sheets of paper laying on the table. Morris retrieved his hat from the shelf of the closet inside the door to collect the ballots, and the slips were passed around. Amy had to get up and wash the stickiness off her hands before she wrote on her paper. They each quietly marked their vote with the letter G or the letter I. Joanna took the hat from Morris when everyone had voted and took each slip out one by one as Susan kept count of the number of each. Chapter 53. Joanna arrived at the back door with her hands full of groceries in the late afternoon. There were no lights on in the house. This is strange because her husband Paul should have been home by now. She saw the lights of his son Liam's van turn in the highway. She set the heavy bags on the table and washed her hands. She felt a little light over the last few days. She actually went out and shopped for decent food for the first time in weeks. She called Paul's name several times in case he was down in the family room and hadn't heard her, because when she came in because of the TV. When she finished with the groceries, she realized that his car was in the garage she had parked in, so he must be home. Was he sleeping? She went down the hall and opened the door. There was no sign of light or sound coming from there. As she opened the door and turned on the light, she had a cold chill run through her. The light revealed her husband's body crumpled on the floor beside the dangling phone receiver. His skull had a hole in it, and there was blood splattered all over the wall. She vaguely thought to herself when she noticed this, how hard it would be to scrub off, then returned the horror in front of her. She barely heard the sound of the electric chair. Her oldest son came up behind her and, turning swiftly, hoping to block his view, she screamed, "Get out! Go out of the room now!" Liam had already seen the corpse. She turned her back to him to hide her agony at seeing him look at his dad's bloody death and said, "It may not be as bad as it looks," as she knelt beside her husband's shoulder and reached for the wrist to take his pulse. His hand was stone cold. But she persisted in her investigations to find life in his body. Finally, she staggered to her feet and turned to her son. He was staring at her with hate. "This is your fault, you bitch." She was flung back with shock at these harsh words from her own child's mouth. He went on, "If you hadn't have been so cold in bed, maybe you wouldn't have had to do what he did to get it. It's all your fucking fault, you frigid cow," he sobbed. Loanna was frozen there in the assault of loss and blame, and then she heard Anthony close the door. Shortly, he called from the kitchen, "Hello, where is everybody?" She started down the hall, but Liam was blocking the door with his heavy wheelchair on purpose, as though he had caught his mother in an act he wanted his younger brother to see. Anthony made his way to the doorway. He looked past his mother to the sight on the floor. He shuffled, staggered against the doorcase, and then clutched the back of his brother's chair. He got a grip on himself and shook his head sadly. His first few words were, "What a shameless, gutless asshole." Loanna studied his expression to see if he meant her or his dad. She felt both sad and relieved to recognize that he was referring to his father. Her younger son continued, "We're better off without him anyway. He was nothing but a cheap, hypocritical bastard." And now Loanna realized that these young men had just lost their father, and this was the reaction. What would or will, she wasn't sure right now if she would carry through her planned suicide or not. They say if and when they found her corpse, would they be sad, broken-hearted, or would they be glad and full of blame and loathing? Then she remembered that they had still had no idea the family had no money. She had maxed out all the credit cards, even cashed a life insurance policy. They'd be lucky to have enough money to bury her husband. It wasn't going to be a fun message to deliver if she stayed around long enough to deliver it. Liam called 911. Anthony was in the guest bathroom puking. She felt like throwing up too. Instead, she escaped the room and went to her dresser and opened a bottle of Valium and dumped several of them into her hand and made for the master bedroom to get water to take them with. Everything seemed to be in slow motion now. She started to walk out of the bedroom but turned and took a look at the marriage bed she could have laid in with her husband for the final time. She couldn't remember the last night they had slept together. She'd been addicted to the online gaming for at least the last 2 years, she thought, if only wistfully, and left. She could hear the noise of the ambulance now that it was too late. Too late for her husband, perhaps for her and the 2 boys she had damaged in utero. Bye bye till next week.